From BLM protests to the war in Vietnam and opposing apartheid South Africa, students have long played a crucial role in liberation movements. Today, a growing tide is speaking up for Palestine. So why is solidarity with Gaza igniting campuses across the world? I'm Myriam Francois, and this is The Stream.
An alternative future is possible.
على عهدي على ديني على أرض تلاقيني أنا لأهلي أنا فديهم.
This is now, huh? This is America, huh?
Come on, man.
Up with liberation.
We are extremely powerful right now.
I can see you, my family sees you, and they need us to continue to fight for them.
We will only concede any victory when Palestine is free.
Free Palestine!
From Japan to Australia via Italy and Yemen, what started as an encampment at Columbia University in New York 2 weeks ago has turned into a global student movement demanding universities divest from Israel. Is this the peace movement of our generation? And can students succeed where so much public pressure has failed? Joining me from the US, UK and Australia to discuss this today are three student organisers. Mahmoud Al Thabata, Palestinian first-year student at Harvard University with the Harvard Out of Occupied Palestine Coalition. Fraser Amos, a PhD student at the University of Warwick with the Warwick Stands with Palestine Coalition. And Jasmine Al Rawi, third-year student at the University of Sydney with the Students for Palestine group. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. Mahmoud, you're joining us from Harvard. Can you tell us exactly what's happening on campus right now?
So basically on campus right now, we are having an encampment where students are occupying the old yard and demanding that they will only leave until we have full disclosure of Harvard's endowment, as well as divestment from the state of Israel and the Israeli regime. Moods are very high right now, and community members are very strong and vigilant and remaining steadfast despite so much administrative repression.
Jasmine, same question over to you there. What's the situation in Sydney?
Yeah, well, we've started our encampments here, seeing what's been happening in the US, wanting to stand in support of the students there who have set up their encampments and demand similar things from our university in order for them to cut ties with weapons companies that are complicit in genocide in Gaza. So Sydney University, for example, has ties to this weapons company, Thales, which has done, collaboration projects that have produced the drones that are used on Palestinians. So we want to see our university end those ties with weapons companies and Israeli institutions in order to stop being complicit in the genocide happening right now.
And Fraser, you're part of the first encampment by a British university. Is the British student movement less politically engaged, or what kinds of unique challenges maybe do you face as compared maybe to your US counterparts when speaking out on Palestine?
Well, I think while we haven't seen the same degree of violence in repressing the protests in Britain that we have at Columbia and Austin and across the US, the British political repression and policing is more sophisticated in some ways. It's more covert. We have something called the Prevent Strategy, for instance, which operates at UK universities and effectively criminalizes and problematizes political speech that's anti-imperialist, targets Muslim students. And we've also had a wave of government repression recently, new legislation that restricts the right to protest, which gives security services power to operate outside of the law. But nonetheless, we're seeing students in the UK are starting to defy that And I think in the coming days, we're going to see an increasing wave of encampments across the country.
Mahmoud, in America, we've seen snipers on campus, rooftops, and very heavy-handed policing. But you've also faced other forms of challenges, haven't you, in terms of doxing and threats of expulsion, and of course, accusations of anti-Semitism?
Yeah, it has been very along campus. Just over the last semester, we've had doxing trucks come around campus into students' parents' houses, which was incredibly frightening. But we've also had several degrees of repression, such as pro-Palestine proctors being evicted from their houses, or also just having, currently right now at the encampment, students who are occupying are being passed ID slips threatening that their degree will be withheld if they continue to occupy the yard right now. However, as I said earlier, students are still remaining vigilant despite administration taking disciplinary action and still say they will dedicate their time to occupy the space until our demands are met.
Well, let's hear from Cameron, the lead organizer for Jewish Voices for Peace at Columbia.
I'm in a tent right now in the encampment. I feel extremely, extremely safe on this encampment. So do my Jewish brothers and sisters who are also on this encampment. We have not heard or seen any anti-Semitic rhetoric used on the encampment or used by people affiliated with it. If there is rhetoric that is anti-Semitic being said by outsiders who are not on campus, we condemn that, but we have no control over what random individuals in New York City say or do. All we do know is that on this encampment and on this campus, Jewish students are standing with pro-Palestinian organizers and are involved in the fight. So yeah, I do believe that anti-Semitism is being weaponized by the university and by the government because the university wants to do anything in their power to take attention away from the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And they will even exploit Jewish trauma to get that message across.
Jasmine, is Jewish safety a concern for you and your colleagues on campus? And how do you ensure it, given so much conflicting information concerning what is said to constitute Jewish fears, including things like, you know, holding a Palestinian flag?
Yeah, well, our protests have been extremely inclusive of people of every faith and every ethnicity and whatnot. We've had Jewish students camp alongside us here at Uni. We've had Jewish speakers at every rally that we've put on. And that, I think that really indicates just the inclusivity of the Palestine movement being a movement that is for justice, it's against genocide, it's anti-racist, and all of that. And I think, you know, the accusations are just used to deflect from the, you know, real things that we're fighting for, the real issues, you know, happening in Palestine right now.
Mahmoud, as a Palestinian, can I ask how you feel about so much media attention being placed on privileged students' safety during an ongoing genocide, including that, of course, of Palestinian students, not least since, of course, there were 3 Palestinian students shot near an American campus back in November 2023. And that was not long after a 6-year-old Palestinian boy and his mother was stabbed at their home in October last year. Is there any discussion of Palestinian safety happening on campuses?
Well, yeah, there for sure is a definite issue of anti-Palestinian racism. I mean, Harvard itself has its own issue with the Department of Education inside this country opening an investigation into the school because they received a very massive complaint over the last semester. However, despite there being so much prejudice and racism that chases Palestinians every day in this country, a lot of times we use the grief we have to motivate us to take action. I mean, if you just look at Brown University, after 3 of the men who were shot just for wearing a keffiyeh and speaking Arabic, Hisham was one of them, and he is a student at Brown University. And right afterwards, they created a Brown Divest Coalition to demand Brown University to divest from the Israeli state, and also ensure that none of their money is going towards investments in genocide, occupation, or apartheid. You see the same thing over here with repression really energizing people on campus. However, there always is a talk to ensure that Gaza and the genocide going on over there right now is at the more forefront of everything we do. We try doing that with having our event programming circulate and surround so much about what the travesty is going on in Gaza right now, as well as making sure that everyone on the ground is aware of what's going on and committed to staying steadfast and demanding Palestinian liberation.
Now, weaponizing privilege for the cause has been a big talking point on campuses. Listen to this.
The kids involved aren't just working class, hardworking kids. Those are kids with privilege. Those are the kids of Congress members and business execs getting arrested. That's a big deal. Columbia University is where the next generation of leaders is supposed to be born. The next generation of oppressors. And now we have all of these young, rich kids using their privilege to fight against a system. Yeah, of course the system's freaking out. And that's not to say that there aren't students that are on that lawn right now risking everything, because there are. But a lot of those kids are weaponizing their privilege against the system that gave them that privilege.
Fraser, I want to ask you, do you think that part of the tough response we're seeing from authorities around the world to these protests is precisely because these are the sons and daughters often of important people who are expected to uphold the status quo?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a factor in what's happening, and I think it speaks to the strength of the global solidarity movement that you have students like that are now being mobilized to take action. The University of Warwick is a fairly prestigious institution in the UK, and it's tied as the most militarized university in the UK. And that position means that students taking action here are very conscious of the power, the disproportionate power that we have and that we wield in the encampment.
And Jasmine, I want to ask you, what does wielding privilege look like at this current juncture?
Well, I think like the example here at Sydney Uni is that our university has this like motto that is leadership for good. And I think what they want is to turn all the students into the future, prime ministers, the future, bosses and CEOs in the world. People like the current Prime Minister of Australia graduated from Sydney Uni, Anthony Albanese. But I think what this student movement is about is kind of condemning that kind of idea of leadership and actually supporting and involving students in a movement that is about fighting against oppression, that is leading a struggle for a free Palestine, rather than all the other pathways that our university wants to take us to.
Well, most people will have heard about the protests at Columbia, but have you heard of Cal State Polytechnic in Humboldt? Because you should.
Cal State Polytechnic in Humboldt. They had a sit-in in one of the university's buildings, and like they do, the cops showed up. And these protesters barricaded them out of the building, physically forced them out, and set up barricades made of chairs, tables, the supplies around them. And I am so proud. These students used the skills that we were forced to obtain because we were constantly in fear of being suddenly under attack. And for a lot of those students, they were. We're in America. Someone in that building was working from experience. Somewhere in that building was at least one survivor. And it worked. They successfully fought off the bad guys with guns.
Mahmoud, American students have basically been trained for revolt.
I don't know necessarily if trained would be the right word, but there is a saying that a lot of protesters use, which is the more they try to silence us, the louder we will be. And that just goes to show how the high degrees of oppression that face college students every single day, even though people can be restricted from protesting with new protest guidelines such as Harvard, or people are not even allowed to set up chairs and they will get arrested for that, such as University of Florida last night, where 9 people were arrested. You can see that so many people utilize this repression and choose it to energize them, mobilize them, but also learn in future circumstances on how to create their new forms of protest.
Fraser, in the US, we've seen some professors and administration staff from the university standing in solidarity with students and even getting arrested. Is that a similar situation in the UK?
Yeah, our coalition is made up of students and staff, and we've been campaigning together with them for months to get the university to demilitarize. And as soon as the encampment was set up on Friday evening, we had loads of staff bringing down supplies, putting up tents, helping in every way they can. And the solidarity between students and staff at Warwick right now is very, very tight. And we're also seeing members of the community come in. It's become a real hub of community solidarity. Families are bringing their kids, drawing pictures in solidarity with Gaza. So we're really seeing staff step up and stand with students.
Jasmine, the Indigenous people of Canada recently gave their approval to students to protest on the land of McGill University. How does your own history and that of the Indigenous people of Australia connect you to this movement?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of solidarity amongst Indigenous people here in Australia with the struggle for a free Palestine. I think it is, a struggle against racism, a struggle against, the history of colonization here in Australia. And I think, we want to constantly draw connections with the broader system of, Australian racism here that continues to see Indigenous, incarceration rates be some of the highest in the world. And continue to see, Indigenous people more likely to go to prison than go to university. I think there's a problem of systemic racism and the lack of any sort of reparations being given to Indigenous people here. And we always stand in solidarity with that struggle. And in fact, here at Sydney University, where I am right now, is where the Freedom Rides started. That was in solidarity with what happened in the US, where some Sydney Uni students took a bus across regional towns to draw attention to the issue of Indigenous oppression and land rights. So it's quite a monumental site of protest. And I think that's the tradition we're standing in, is all these historic fights against injustice, against racism, and all of that.
Now, there has been some criticism online of how the protest movement is being framed. Take a look at this. Yeah, I kind of don't like that student protests are being labeled anti-war. We are part of a liberation movement. The hashtag isn't NYU for no war, it's NYU for Palestine. Until our universities divest and Palestine is free, the students will keep mobilizing. Mahmoud, we've seen some people online describe this as the global student intifada. How do you define this movement?
Well, personally, I definitely do like that name a lot. I do think it describes what's going on college campuses, which is communities coming together, mobilizing and fighting to be on the right side of history, which is to have full disclosure and divestment from the Israeli state to make sure Palestine is free within our lifetimes. I mean, just whenever I walk around the encampment on campus, there is such a strong community that is staying vigilant, despite administration coming through the camp every single day and routinely checking IDs, routinely threatening graduation, routinely threatening to even suspend students, or some students who are immigrants and who do not have permanent residence inside the United States. They have visas. They've been threatened with disciplinary action, and they're okay despite the fact that they can literally be deported by the university soon. So I think colleges all across the country right now they are mobilizing for Palestinian liberation first and foremost at the forefront. And just the amount of vigilance I see personally as a Palestinian truly does keep the movement alive, and keeps me going every single day to mobilize, but also to organize and just stay steadfast.
I want to ask you all one by one now about the objectives of this global movement. Fraser, what are the objectives of the movement as you understand it, and where do Palestinians sit in defining those objectives?
Well, our encampment and our campaign is first and foremost inspired by the struggle of the Palestinian people and the people of Gaza. We're demanding that our university divest and break all ties with armed companies, that it condemns the genocide, the occupation, the dispossession of the Palestinian people, that it pledges to help rebuild Gaza's education sector, and that it protects free speech in solidarity with Palestine. And I think at the same time as seeing this encampment as part of the global Palestine solidarity movement, we also see how the struggle of the Palestinian people is connected to the struggle of all oppressed people against colonialism, and how the war machine that's tested in Gaza is deployed around the world by the United States and its allies to suppress liberation struggles.
Jasmine, same question to you. Is this an anti-war movement, a liberation struggle? How do you define it, and where do Palestinians sit within that?
Yeah, well, I think there isn't necessarily something mutually exclusive about fighting for Palestinian liberation, but also fighting against war. Like a lot of the weapons companies that we're demanding our university cut ties with are also complicit in, creating the weapons used by the Australian military that have deployed them, when they've joined the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think we want to fight against these arms companies in order to not only see an end to the genocide happening in Gaza, but to end any future genocide and any future war that sees, our government and governments across the world put their own interests, their imperialist interests, beyond the interests of ordinary people.
And Mahmoud, as a Palestinian yourself, how do you feel about the fact this issue is igniting US campuses and global campuses?
Yeah, like I said earlier, it truly does warm my heart. I mean, just talking to my mother the other day, and she was an organizer for Palestinian liberation in her time as well. She told me she would never expected such a global student movement that fights for Palestinian liberation to the extent where it is right now. But I mean, truly, I feel like just with this movement in general, it does show how students are now changing their beliefs and how there's been so much Zionist propaganda in the past. It's being disrupted. I mean, students who are in universities right now will eventually obtain jobs, will eventually obtain places of power within their lives. But I truly hope that this ends up with change to the Israeli regime and for the full decolonization and occupation of Palestine. And it will be free in our lifetime because of the student movement and because people have shown their solidarity to Palestinians and stood on the right side of history with Palestinians demanding liberation for their land.
Well, one thing we have heard from student protesters we've spoken to is the need to center Palestinians. So let's end this discussion by hearing from Farah Amar, a student from Gaza who was doing a degree in media before the Israeli assault dramatically changed her life. Over to you, Farah.
Hello, I am Farah. I am from Gaza. I registered at Al University and joined the Party Press and Media, which had been dream science shorthead. But Israel war killed my dream, and I lost my feet and eyes. My life was beautiful before the war. I would prepare breakfast, and I then go early to university. University ends. And I go home on food, but now I have no feet. My message to the world is to stop the war, and I thank university students around the world for their support to stop the war in Gaza specifically.
I want to thank you, our guests, Mahmoud, Fraser and Jasmine. And of course, thank you all for watching. Are you part of the global student movement? We want to hear from you. Send us your content. Get in touch using the hashtag or the handle AJStream, and we will look into it. Stay awake, and I'll see you soon.